would have already seen the slides.
Yes, yeah, they were sent out to elected members end of the week, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie, if you just want to talk through that and just invite me to chip in, I've probably understandably been mostly thinking about COVID-19 over the last 5 months. So, I'm not wholly up to date with the evidence like you will be, which is why I just went, I'm not planning to present summaries of studies and that sort of stuff.
Pretty much in the same boat, Rich. I've been working at the lodge for I've only been back in the office for two weeks or so, and but it's been quite interesting. So yeah, just
you would have been able to be working from home, just keeping way up to date.
Yeah, probably not as busy as you, that's for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Just to let you guys all know, we are now streaming live to YouTube as well. So anything you don't want people to know, I would just maybe just be a bit aware of that. That's all.
Thanks, Carmen.
Morning, all.
Hey, Mark.
Morning,
how
Mark.
are you?
Hey. Yeah. G'day, Charlie.
Good
to see you.
Kia ora, Paula. Yeah, you too, mate. You too. Kia ora, Paula.
He's muted, I think. I want $1 for every time you've done that, Paula.
No. Although we could have a jar that everybody contributes into, because I'm not the only one.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. It'd be a great Christmas, though, I can tell you.
Yeah, wouldn't it? It would really. Yeah, I feel like in life I'm often talking to myself, so what's new?
Yeah. Yeah, such as our lives.
Yeah. Okay, so are we expecting anybody else? I can't really tell.
Maxine and Erin are both in the call. I'm not sure if you want to wait another few minutes. That's up to you, Maripola.
Morena, everyone.
Morena,
Maxine.
Oh, so annoyingly, I've got a split screen on my computer, and before yesterday, I could move things this way, and now it has to go that way with the cursor. Does that make sense to anybody? But so I have to chase it off one end of the screen and round onto the other screen, whereas before I used to just be able to go whip. So I've done something. It's me. It's all me. Okay, well, we might as well make a start on the first topic, which is our smoke-free policy and stuff, isn't it?
Yep.
And have you been leading this piece of work, Mark?
No, I haven't. I remember a year ago or so, I remember being instrumental in kicking it to touch for another year, because for two reasons, if I remember right, Nick. There was the issue around the smoking around outside along my Henry Bennett, and there was the vaping discussion we had where there wasn't really information other than it's a bad look to sway us to make the vaping, increase the smoking thing to include vaping. So we were hoping to get some more evidence either way, whether it's a gateway in or a gateway out of smoking, with how real the health risk is, other than being a bad look. Because I think, if I remember rightly, the comment was, well, if we're going to can vaping in the middle of town because it's a bad look, we might as well can puffer jackets and shorts at the same time. So that was pretty much where
only when some people wear them.
What's that?
Only when some people wear them.
Yeah, but so that was pretty much where we left. Is that right, Nick? Where we left off?
Yeah, that's largely right. Like I'm happy to kind of kick it off and get started if you like.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Can I? Sorry, I'd like to say something here, because there was another issue which I did raise at the time, and that was the inability / unwillingness of the DHB to provide a smoking facility on campus for inpatients at Henry Bennett Centre, which was in fact the actual driver of some of the behaviour that people were concerned about in public.
Well, we've obviously got the DHB here, so we might be able to answer some of those questions. But I'll I can make a bit of a start and introduce people so that everybody knows who's here.
Yes, please.
So good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for your time. So yeah, largely today is just to kind of recap on the smoke-free policy. So for those that were on the last term of council, you'll remember that the smoke-free policy was passed in February of last year. At the time, there was a recommendation to include vaping alongside smoking in our smoke-free areas in the city. So that decision was declined at the time, and elected members asked for an update after 12 months. So basically, this is our opportunity to come back and have a bit of a chat about that and see if that leads to a request from elected members to make any changes to the policy at this point. So yeah, just right off the bat, I'd just like to make sure I introduce our colleagues from the DHB and Cancer Society. So I'll actually let them introduce themselves. So we've got both Richard and Charlie here. So if you guys just want to introduce yourselves and just give a bit of a background on who you are and where you're coming from on this particular subject. You might
kia ora,
unmute
guys.
yourselves.
Yeah, kia ora, guys. I'm Charlie. I'm from the Cancer Society. I've been working in tobacco control for probably about 4 years now, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you today again since last year. So thank you.
And kia ora, I'm Richard Hoskins, one of the medical officers of health here. I've been a medical officer of health and a public health physician for far too long. You know, I remember when the initial Waitakere smoke-free legislation went through. So working, you know, on all sorts of public health issues, obviously the most recent one being COVID.
Yeah, are you exhausted now?
I was. It's, you know, we've definitely, because of the efforts of everybody, not been so bad the last few weeks.
Yeah, true. We're on a way up, we hope. Okay.
Okay, so I've
next.
just shared the
Thanks.
screen, which is just the presentation notes, and I'll run through them reasonably quickly because I think you've all had an opportunity to read some of the background beforehand. So largely the smoke-free outdoor areas policy was adopted, as I said, last year. So originally it was a review of an existing policy, and it basically sets out areas within the city that are designated as being smoke-free. It is a policy, so it's educative. It sets an expectation, relies on the community support and our City Safe staff to kind of encourage people not to smoke, but it isn't a bylaw, it is a policy. And it's obviously supported by signage and our staff as well. So at the moment, it doesn't include vaping, so it's just about cigarette smoking at the moment. And so obviously this is an opportunity to maybe talk and have a look at that particular issue. So at the time, it was recommended that the smoke-free outdoor areas policy included vaping. Elected members decided not to go along with that at the time. The reasoning from the DHB and the Cancer Society at the time was that this would reduce the normalisation of smoking and vaping to protect others from it and to further protect young people in our community. So obviously that was not adopted at the time. Our elected members asked that we leave it as is for a year and then come back in a year's time with any new information. There's obviously been a little bit happen in terms of legislation being introduced into Parliament in the meantime, but there has been some other research evidence that has been done. And so I'm actually going to ask the DHB and the Cancer Society to kind of lead the discussion on what has changed since then. So I'll chuck this slide up and I might pass over to Richard in the first sense to actually just talk about what has happened in the last year or what he would like to update you on, and I'm sure Charlie will have some things he would like to add in as well.
Thanks, Nick. So, I mean, this is really just going through what's in the slide, but I think the overall, obviously, there's been more research published and more findings in the last year, and the overall tenor of that is that it is firming up that vaping is almost certainly less harmful than tobacco. A quantification of that does not yet exist, but being less harmful doesn't mean that it is harmless. Similarly, there have been some studies published now which also show that passive or bystander vape inhalation is also not harmless, particularly for people with existing respiratory conditions. The other two, I think, important things is the reports from school principals and very strongly worded information that vaping is a huge problem with respect to their school populations and highly prevalent, and the government deciding that for the legislated smoke-free areas, at least proposing in their bill, that those all automatically cover vaping. And I think the important thing to note is that vaping should be regarded as either a substitute or another quit tool, and that for both of those, as a substitute, the evidence is actually poor. There's lots of individual stories, but the systematic evidence is showing that people don't necessarily cut down on their tobacco use with vaping, they just add it. But that with vaping to quit, it needs to be part of a properly managed quit program, like using the other quit products, and that it can be as successful and more successful for some people, obviously, whatever suits individuals, as the other established vaping things. And that's the reason that the Health Promotion Agency is strong on promoting vaping. It is as a less harmful, although not harmless, substitute, or as a way into quitting successfully. So that's really where we're at now, broad strokes of the situation with the evidence and in New Zealand.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Charlie, do you have something to add on that one?
No, pretty much. I think he's said a lot of the things that I was probably going to mention anyway. I just wanted to touch on things that the World Health Organization have written in their statement around e-cigarettes. I thought that might be quite useful. So there's a couple of, you can easily find this on their website. So ENDS, which is electronic nicotine devices, perhaps. ENDS emissions typically contain nicotine and other toxic substances that are harmful to both users and those exposed to the vapors, to the secondhand vapors. ENDS use increases the risk of heart disease and lung disorders, which has already been mentioned by Richard. They also pose significant risk to pregnant women who use them, as they damage the growing fetus. ENDS also expose the non-smokers and bystanders to nicotine and other harmful chemicals. Furthermore, there is a growing body of evidence in some settings that never smoker minors who use ENDS at least double their chance of starting to smoke conventional tobacco cigarettes later in life. And I think just with that, you'll notice that there's been a lot of uptake with a lot of young teenagers around this in schools, particularly in the Waikato as well. We've had some concerns from St. Peter's, but also all the schools that I've touched base with, probably at least 8 or 9 of them. There was one out of all of those schools, there was one school that said that they never had a problem with vaping, but they'd still like to see regulations in place. So that was the question that I posed with them. There was a comment also made by one of the deputy principals from Hamilton High. Vaping is becoming a major concern for our young people in Aotearoa. It is causing some real social and health concerns in our community. As a school, we are sincerely concerned about its impact on not only our boys, but on our community. It is dangerous, far too readily available, and is only having a negative impact on schools across the Waikato and New Zealand. So I think it's really important to probably be really mindful of the popularity that it's raising among young people, and if we can limit that as much as possible, particularly with all the emerging evidence that's sort of suggesting that it's not as harmless as vape advocates are trying to urge, particularly with government and lobbyists and things like that. There's a lot of concern around that as well. So I think it's just really important for us to be mindful of the modeling that we're presenting to young people, and obviously it's with the lack of regulations with the government already, it's already caused lots of distractions with young people in schools. And yeah, so if there's any questions.
Can I ask a couple of questions through you, if that's all right, of our friends from the DHB and Cancer Society? Do you have numbers at the moment as to whether vaping is going up? Are there more people vaping now than used to be? Is it taking off, or is it reducing? Or
It certainly has taken up. It's actually I didn't get that data, but what I do know is that with that being used as a the actual data, I mean the actual stats for that, but what we do know is that there's only about 7 in a research done by Aspire, Janet Hoyt, she said that only 7 to 17% of people that have used electronic nicotine cigarettes to as a form of cessation are the only ones that have actually successfully achieved that. So it's a real minute comparison if you look and compared to some of the other traditional methods of cessation.
I guess what I'm trying to find out is how much of a problem is it out there in our streets at the moment? Is it something that's growing or something that's diminishing anyway? Because I mean, anecdotally, I see less people vaping than I used to, but I'm just wondering if there's any figures, something around how many people are vaping.
I think there's two things to consider there, Mark. The first is that the principals have been very clear in their information that for the young people, they know well it is an increasing and quite prevalent problem. And the second bit of information there is that the vape industry have become incredibly sophisticated with their stealth products. So there is now a lot of stuff slickly marketed, I would say targeted mostly at young people, that is, enables you to vape without necessarily being caught out. So, we need to be careful with anecdote. Having said that, anecdotally, I've noticed an increase in the risk of bystander tobacco, both on the hospital campus, in the streets around it that were smoke-free, and also, and interestingly, we weren't in the Waiora CBD building a year ago, but we are now, and certainly particularly for the side that fronts on Anglesey Street, that service, the infant and child mental health youth and child mental health has only recently moved in there, and already the staff there are complaining about ingress of smoke from the area outside their entrance, because it's quite a congregating area around the bus stop there.
Absolutely. And okay, thank you. And I mean, I guess it's up to us to sort of make that judgment call. Will prohibition of it in streets have a positive or a negative effect on the thing? But that's a discussion down the track. Just finally, the smoke-free bill that includes vaping in, that Parliament brought through in February. What's the effect of that, Nick? And what actually does that bill say?
So my understanding in terms of its impact on our policy is that it will basically and jump in, guys, if I've got this wrong, but that in terms of smoking, it will any indoor smoke-free areas, my apologies, will automatically become vape-free as well. But in terms of our outdoor areas, so anything where we've got, which is what our smoke-free policy is about, is outdoor areas, that wouldn't necessarily include vaping. They would need to be added in kind of manually by councils. So in terms of that, I think the larger stuff around the piece of legislation is really around the sale and supply. It's around how they're marketed, all that kind of stuff. What are the other features of it that I'm missing there, guys?
Is it the same one with
flavors?
Cars?
Yeah.
Is it the same?
So that's another one that hasn't quite yet been included, and so that's certainly going to be something that Cancer Society is going to be advocating as well. So that hasn't been guaranteed to be included in the into the new regulations.
Thank you, and it's an interesting one because Dave's got a take quite from a different angle on this whole thing. So those are my concerns around it. So thank you, I appreciate the info, guys.
We'll come to all the questions. Dave, do you want to go next?
As a question, I just want to put to Richard. I just listened to your point about Anglesey Street and the bus stop and the smoking from people outside into your area. Are not most of the people using that particular bus stop from users of services within the building or their families?
I can't answer that. I don't have that information. Dave, I missed half of that question. Your voice broke up on our computer. So
just the first bit. First bit, Dave, as you were leading in context.
Yeah, the context is the smoke ingress from the area of the Anglesea Street bus stop outside your building there. And I said, are not most of those people users of services within the building?
Yeah, and I don't have systematic information that would enable me to answer that. My prejudice would be it's a mix of staff leaving at the end of the day, of users of the service, and of other people who use that part of the city.
Okay, the evidence that I've had in the past from the Waikato Regional Council is that bus stop users of that particular bus stop are people who use services in there, and it used to be DSW had some facilities in there as well, and I don't think they do now. So it seems to me that one of the things that's happening here, and I'm putting this to you, is that you, the DHB, are asking the city to put in a policy to control something that isn't controlled in your own sort of, it's controlled inside your building, but you've just pushed it immediately outside. I mean, what smoking cessation services or support are offered to users and staff of your building there?
I mean, the short answer to that is that everybody is eligible and can be easily referred to the once and for all cessation service. We certainly have policies that cover our staff smoking both, on our facilities, but also when they're identifiable as our staff. And I'm sure if there are explicit examples, they can be referred and that can be followed up through the DHB policies.
Richard, you just mentioned that your intuitive response, I think, was that some of the people outside were your staff at the bus stop there who are smoking.
Yeah, I said that I would think a mix of users off that bus stop. I wasn't explicitly saying that I had any evidence that it was our staff.
Okay.
Well,
so another question, Dave, because you can come up and debate on that one.
Yeah, will be, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kesh.
Hi, thank you. I'm just trying to get my head around understanding. Richard, using my pharmacist hat, there are vaping products on the market these days that are marketed as a quit smoking type solution. And these are obviously different to the vaping products sold at those vaping outlet stores. So my question is, do you have any inside information as to a timeline of when such products would be classed as medicines? And how would you differentiate between a medicine vaping product versus a recreational one?
I think the distinction is relatively arbitrary at this point. In our submission on the bill currently before the House, we've said we think all vaping products, if their purpose is to replace or support quitting, should be subject to the medicines regulations. Obviously, that's a decision for Parliament to make, but certainly things like the inhalators and nicotine patches are all covered as cessation products under the appropriate medicines regs.
Could I just add to that? Just on top of that, yeah, we're certainly trying to push that they be with government to advocate that they should be included as a pharmaceutical product or some sort of therapeutic product, so that they get more regulations around it, as opposed to just some corner dairy open just selling all these products to our young people that are just becoming so easily accessible. So that's certainly on our as part of our list of things to encourage the government to implement. And if you look in the Australian laws, they've classed it as a poison, as a what do they say, under Australian poison regulations, the possession and use of nicotine for vaping is effectively banned, and unless it's without prescription. Nicotine is classified as a Schedule 7 dangerous poison. So that's the issue that we have with vaping that are sold on just like dairies and tūrolo shops and things like that, where young people are more likely to be able to access them, as opposed to some of those specialist shops where they've got a little bit more training behind them to be able to educate the people that are and obviously have a better way of screening people whether they are actual smokers that are trying to quit, as opposed to just some young teenagers sort of popping in and just grabbing some product that doesn't have any of those regulations around them.
Because I guess it comes down to when will it be regulated, because there's no control over what's in it at the moment, and that's what the concern is. Yeah. Thanks, Paula.
Certainly, the draft legislation covers regulation of products and their content. It just doesn't cover including them as a pharmaceutical.
Thank you. Martin?
The legislation is, obviously things have been interrupted. It's currently before is it at select committee stage, or where is it at in terms of the House?
Yes, the submissions closed during the panic time of COVID, sorry, the very busy time. I have not heard when the select committee are considering those, but the indication we got when we asked if it was going to be extended was that they intended to do that via Zoom during, levels 3 and 4.
I think it would be good, Nick. Yeah, thank you. It would be good, Nick, if we at least had a list of, once that can be published, a list of submitters to the bill, for the simple reason that in there, and I'm going back to our population health team, obviously, as you know, admire what you do in a whole lot of range areas, but I certainly have been aware in various previous roles that there has been different, even, from the health sector, some different, a range of views, I think, with regard to vaping on the basis of a lesser of evils approach. You've talked about the DHB position. Obviously, that's your independent. We respect that as an independent input. Are there any other sort of, are these views now that you're unanimous, or are there still some variety of perspectives within the health sector?
Nothing will be unanimous. I would say the vast majority of people, like the respiratory physicians, certainly the public health community, believe that vaping is a useful tool to support cessation, but should be done properly like other cessation things, and are concerned that it's being perceived as harmless when in fact it's just probably less harmful.
Okay,
less of evils. I think, just can I go to Nick? The other thing I would be looking at is, before council upgraded its bylaws and its approach, then it's of course the issue of education. I get that, the issue of enforcement, and my concerns about the nature of enforcement in certain areas, I think, are probably well known. Nick, will that be part of the report? I mean, you have a bylaw, but what do you intend to do to enforce it?
So it is a policy as opposed to a bylaw. So in terms of its enforceability, it is enforced through kind of that peer pressure approach. Our City Safe staff do approach people who are in garden place and the transport centre if they do see them smoking, and remind them that it is a smoke-free area, but they don't have the power to actually remove them for smoking in that particular area. That approach seems to be working well, and that's an approach that we have been using for quite some time. So that's prior to the last review of this policy. It's what's been in place for, I think, about 5 years, but it could be longer than that. So that's kind of how we're managing that. If we were to add vaping in, we would simply be doing the same thing. So you would have City Safe staff approaching people who are vaping as well as smoking in that area.
Yeah, I mean, and I look forward to the long debate. I mean, some of us have got kids. I don't want them to vape, but it's a lesser of evil. So I think that nuance. And obviously the pop health team will know my concerns, particularly around the hospital campus and even in town, the way in which this is enforced and this is communicated, because there will be some people who, for very understandable reasons, may not be very receptive.
So we've got Tapora. Good morning.
Morning, kia ora, Richard. My question's probably for you, so Nick, and it was just around the proposed areas for the policy, one being largely around wilder CBD. and then the other was around the Waikato DHB, and hence the reason that we had to come back a year later. Aside from the vaping research, has there been any thought to break these up into sections? Because the one should be Waiora CBD, and then alongside that we should know public views on this space, and then the other around the DHB area, because it's quite a large. When you talk about DHB, it's so large.
Kia ora te pora. Left to our own devices, we would have the entire city centre smoke-free. We think there's a particular significance around, a health facility, that something which is the antithesis of that, should be less prevalent. But cards on the table. It'd be great if all outdoor areas were smoke-free.
The other one was around around our city safe, and so while we get them to go around and monitor who's smoking and ask them to politely put it out or remind them that this isn't a smoking area, what sort of support do they get to provide really brief, quick advice?
We've certainly offered to provide that support in the past, and I'm sure if if requests came through that they could access our training, or at least be trained in exactly the best methods for getting people referred through to the once and for all service, then I'm sure the DHB and colleagues behind me might be able to comment better, would receive that request enthusiastically.
Yeah. Sorry, and finally, do we have, for Māoris, we know that those rates of smoking are very high, so it's one thing to have all these policies in place. Do we actually have really good quit smoking support where anybody that is public facing would be able to refer people off to or suggest where you can go to? Do we actually have that good support, mindful of the goal of smoke free 2025 and how far we've gotten on that?
I believe we do have. I know that from time to time there will be glitches in terms of people's access to it, but it's certainly a nationally funded, provided and specified service, and it uses the best evidence available. From time to time the DHB, not me, other parts of the DHB, review who's providing that and so forth, but I think we do.
Okay, thank you. Dave.
Thanks. I had another
Sorry, you're frozen.
question to Richard, just to do with, okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, sorry. I had another question to Richard to do with vaping. Are patients at Henry Bennett Centre sometimes prescribed vaping as part of the smoking cessation program within that facility?
It won't be ENDS products, it will be the inhalator that they can be prescribed.
So no vaping from that source?
Not that I'm aware of. I obviously don't run the mental health services of the DHB, but that's my understanding.
Thanks.
Thank you. We don't seem to have any other questions at this time. So what are you?
Sorry, I apologise. Yeah. Nick, could you help me? I mean, obviously we've received, thank you for the briefing today from both our presenters. Nick, you're just going to take us through when this comes back to a formal council meeting and where, have I got that right?
Yeah, I was just about to ask the same question.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. So sorry, I can jump back in there. So having answered questions, I guess probably moving on to that final slide in the presentation, which was really what options are available to elected members from here. So we're really looking at your guidance as to where we should take this next. So there's some recommended actions from the Medical Officer of Health and the Cancer Society there. There are other options at the bottom there. So largely we can go ahead and update the policy and bring that back to a future community committee meeting and go through the process of adding vaping and potentially reinstating those areas around the DHB if that's what elected members want. The other options are to see what happens with the legislation, and the last option there is to retain the policy in its current forms. So I don't know if the Cancer Society or the DHB wanted to make any further points here, but those are kind of the options that are available there. So I guess from here, we're just looking for your recommendations as to what you would like us to do as staff with this policy, and we can go away and do that.
Okay, so let's take a little bit of go around the councillors who want to make a comment on that. The more feedback we get, councillors, the better early on, so that staff don't, waste a lot of time on an option that's not going to fly, given that we haven't got everybody here. So we'll just go down and talk to each councillor and see what your views are on the first hand. Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. And I'm presuming this would go back to a council meeting as opposed to a committee meeting of some sort.
I'm sorry, Mark, I may be wrong on that. I assumed it would go to the community committee and then on to council but it could be direct to council. If I'm wrong on that, I apologise. Yeah, well, I'd certainly be keen to bring it back to council because the firm resolution was last time we want to have this debate again. And I really appreciate the guys from DHB and Cancer Society turning up with a bit more grunt in their argument this time, because that was really, for me, what was the tipping point with the whole non-vaping thing, is that we had no evidence. So I think it's definitely a discussion we should be having this year and every year, actually, frankly. When's the legislation due from the government? I don't have. Richard, do you have a better idea of that?
No, we've not seen any timetable.
I think just to add to that, Mark, I think initially the government was hoping to have it passed by the time of the election this year, but given COVID, I think that may now not be possible. I'm not sure. Okay, well, look, I'd be supportive of it coming back and having a really grunty discussion about it, because I think it is for the health well-being of our residents absolutely vital that we should be looking at this thing every year.
So just in respect to that, your leaning is to what, waiting for central government, or? No, it's to do it ourselves. I think if we're waiting for central government, it'll be after the election into that. So you're lining up with one of the, with options 1, 2 and 3, potentially? Yeah, and at least to have the discussion. Yeah. Yep, definitely. Okay. Martin? I'm just going to go down councillors and sort of get a roundup.
Yeah. Number one, this must come back to the community committee. Why? There are 2 members of the community committee, including Tupora, who's actually has deep and ongoing involvement with the DHB, all right, and health areas. So dare I say it, a Maori perspectives, I think will be quite crucial in this considered discussion. Good point. 2, I want a considered discussion, and do not misinterpret me wanting to do everything I can in the public health space, but I'm leaning more in the end to 4 and 5. For the simple reason that I do think we need to have a look at what the law and the legislation says. That's not to say that we shouldn't have an update, prior to that. That's cool. And as people would know my position, I think really totally want to uphold the public health gains, working with our young people. But I think we have to have an appropriate, nuanced approach and reckon, yes, of course, it's a health issue, absolutely. But nuance means you work out what is the most effective way to advance health goals.
Okay, thank you, Maxine. I'm just going, I see you down the screen, if that's okay.
Thanks, Mayor Paula, and thanks to our presenters today. Really appreciate taking the time to come in and to give us your wisdom. I think what concerns me the most about the vaping issue is our young people and the impacts that it can have on them today and into their futures, and that it can indeed lead to other things. I'm an ex-smoker, so I know just how difficult it is to be able to come off that. I did that decades ago now, but sucked into it as a young person, and so I know what that peer pressure and stuff looks like. That would be my major concern. And in terms of signalling an indication from council, I think a policy is a really good place for that to stand. Education is absolutely the best way in order to be able to bring out all of the issues around smoking and vaping, and that young people having access to that information is critical. Not victimizing or traumatizing smokers further, or blaming them unnecessarily for their often involuntary habit is not something that I would support. So gentle education from City Smart is a good approach, although I don't know that I support that happening to suit some lack of facility for staff or for patients at the DHB. Sadly to say, I think the council provides an area for people to be able to use, and I think that there's an acknowledgement that you will have across all of your service people who are addicted to it, and so providing a space for them to do that safely without reproach is desirable in my view. I think I am much more inclined to see where the legislation will be taking us in that, and that will create a wider debate across not just Hamilton but our country as well. So I think I would be much more inclined to see where that legislation takes us. I acknowledge that won't be in any quick time frame. There's only 6 weeks of Parliament sitting to go, and I can't see that it's going to come up as a priority for them. So it's likely to be another 12 months if we're thinking March 2021. So yeah, that's about where I'm at. Kia ora.
Thank you. Tapora, I think, is next. Oh, sorry, carry on.
And thank you, Mayor Paula. Kia ora, Richard, and ngā mihi to you and the team for coming along second time in a row to give us a briefing in anticipation for next week. Support the vaping, support the inclusion of vaping. I think what I'm probably more interested in is hearing the public views around this, and while I appreciate the evidence that is there, it would be good to have that reinforcement that this is something that the public support around the smoke-free areas. I do think around the vaping that we probably just need to make a decision on that, otherwise we will be waiting 12 or so months and be back here again. But I think the main thing is the public views and other community views than DHB and Cancer Society, to show that it's not just Big Brother saying this is what's best for everybody. Though I absolutely appreciate the expertise that sit within the DHB and the Cancer Society, but it's probably more the public experiences of being around these buildings and having to go through either clouds of smoke or perhaps not. And those that, and by no means am I endorsing smoking at all, but for one reason or another, people are addictive, and then we need to also be mindful that there are other reasons that go along with that, medical reasons, social reasons, why they do what they do, and we may be doing them a disservice to getting better by including smoke-free areas, particularly around the hospital. I just think that we need to understand that a wee bit better to make a rightly informed decision, which is what I was also talking about, sections, perhaps not around the Henry Rongomo Bennett Centre, perhaps around the Blood Centre, or just like that, but to do it on the whole may mean that we don't get anywhere with smoke-free areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dave.
Thanks, Paula. Look, I agree with the points that Martin and Maxine have made, and some of Tapora's comments just now as well. As a militant anti-smoker and the person that moved our very first no smoking public bylaw policy, I'm very supportive of the public health message, but I'm not supportive of it being just a message without some means of delivery and common sense approach. And that's where my problems arise with us going any further than what we have at the moment. I think that when we have our next discussion, and we sure will, it has to be at the community committee for the reasons Martin's talked about. That is definitely where it should happen, because that way we do involve Mangai Māori and a wider cross section of the community. Of course, I would like to see a wider discussion going on in the community anyway, and with a bit of luck, that's quite likely to happen nationwide once that policy comes through. I think we'd be wasting our time to have a meeting before we see the central government policy, because then we'll sure as eggs need another one afterwards. And while Mark might love an annual discussion on smoking policy, I'm not sure that that's the most productive use of council's time. Let's do it when we've got the full information. We unfortunately won't have until the central government has done its thing. I'm concerned, like Maxine, about the vaping situation, though interestingly, like Mark, I had noticed anecdotally a seeming less use in public recently than this year than previous recent years. So, but that could be totally anecdotal. I'm just moving in the wrong circles. I don't know. So let's wait for the legislation. Let's discuss it at the community committee in an all-round way once we have that central government information. We may not have to wait until the legislation's passed. It may be obvious when it gets put in front of the House in the sort of first, second reading stage what it's going to be or what it's likely to be, and then we can have our discussion. But let's not jump the gun and then have to redo it. Thanks.
Thanks. Just two more councillors who've been in this discussion, Kesh and then Rob. And then me.
My main concern right now is, like most people have mentioned, the lack of legislation around vaping, and the consequences of that in terms of the detrimental effects to public health and the additional cost to our health system. So I would be keen to look at options 1, 2, or 3 and do something now rather than later, because there is no timeline on when vaping products would be regulated. I'd love to see it regulated because of all the detrimental effects that I just mentioned. And if possible, I'd even look at extending the policy as wide as possible But in saying that, I do think that there is a role for DHB to play in terms of education, and in particular education with schools around the dangers of vaping, because there's such a huge range of vaping products on the market, and there's literally no legislation to say what those ingredients can or cannot be. So I think we do have a role to play in terms of taking some responsibility around public health.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time, so we'll just go through Rob, then you, and then myself. You're mute, Rob. Rob.
I am too. Thanks, Mayor Paula. I was late to the meeting. I've enjoyed the discussion, but I don't have anything further to add.
Thanks. You. Councillor Ewan, have you got, I see you're here.
Yeah, very quickly, I support vaping being included in all smoke-free areas. I think the community committee is the right place for the discussion. I would like to talk about the one issue regarding those patients of Henry Bennett being able to get access to a safe place to smoke. And I know that's sort of paradoxical, but I'm just concerned about some of the significant bad results that have occurred over people needing to try to get access to smoking and having to leave the campus to do so. But I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate at a committee level.
Thanks. So from my perspective, it doesn't come as a great surprise to me that anything you inhale into your lungs could be harmful to you, apart from oxygen, air. So it does worry me very much, mostly around the young people who, you know, find it a social activity in town to sit with their friends and vape and so on. So, you know, from council's point of view, we've got a larger piece of work to consider around our youth and making our central city an area, or in other public places, an area where youth will want to hang out for different reasons. That's a big picture stuff. I'm probably inclined to extending the policy to include vaping. It's not helpful though, like Dave says, that we're waiting for central government legislation. And you know, Nick, I guess we've got really no clear steer with the backlog of parliamentary work and the elections as to quite when we would expect to hear a final thing, or do we? So are we talking 6 months? Are we talking a year? You know, there's a few things we've been waiting for from central government that haven't quite come through.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't give you any further details on that one.
You don't know, Richard, when that might be?
No, that's up to the House to determine their order of things. But, you know, I mean, I would point out that a number of other councils have already moved on this issue. Yeah. It's very unlikely that government would stop you doing these sorts of things through that legislation.
Yeah. So
and just adding to that, in fact, I've left it up to local councils to have that mandate on whether to implement those vaping into their environment areas as well, outdoor environment areas, smoke-free outdoor environments. So yeah, even if the legislation does go through with the regulations that have been already been presented, with the recent amendments that we're thinking about adding, it would still come down to local government anyway. My guess is.
Yeah, very helpful. Thanks, Charlie. That's So in that respect, we should push forward and have the talk about the options 1, 2, and 3. And I support Dave's comments around Henry Rongamai building. And we'll see if we can chase up through one of our networks when and how government intend to look at this, see if we can get some intelligence from central government about where it's sitting. It would be useful to all of us, I think. But yep, I think it would be good for me to see that 1, 2, and 3 explored, but also Nick to, as other areas have done stuff, to have a look at how that's working for them. You know, I mentioned this when it came up before. One of the key issues for me is the ability to enforce that. I mean, one of our smoke-free areas being Garden Place, for example, where frequently people are smoking, you know, so there's a whole big picture about that that's around encouraging people to do what's right for them, healthier for community, but knowing at the same time that this, you know, there's no big stick to chase this up. We can't chase people around the town saying you won't smoke, you won't vape. We can only set up a really positive environment to dissuade them from it and make it more difficult to do it so liberally. Okay, so that's that. Thank you very much to our guests for coming in, Charlie and Richard and team. We appreciate it. And the steps that we will be taking by consensus. Oh, Sarah, you don't have anything to add? I see you there, sorry. No, okay. So I think by consensus, the view is that we will have this discussion through community committee, and then if necessary, push the actions up to whole of council to vote on the policy.
Sorry, Paula, it wasn't consensus.
I know. It was
about 50-50 on whether we waited for government legislation or not.
You think? I thought it was actually a reasonably clear majority towards the first, but let me check. Okay, those people who, well, we can put both options up, so it's immaterial, Dave. We can put both options up.
Surely the best thing to do is to find out, get some information on when the legislation is likely, and it's not that hard to find that out. And then if it's going to be in 2 years, then we go ahead, of course. Yeah, but it's going to be in 3 months.
I agree. We should do that. We should do that.
I'll be pragmatic about that before I bring it to the community committee too. If it's going to change in 3 months, it's ridiculous.
I think we've all agreed that would be a useful step in the information, and we'll bring back the options to council through the community committee. I guess it's a good steer for staff. I felt it was slightly a majority towards doing it anyway, but we'll of course test that through the democratic process at the time. Richard and Charlie, any new information that you can provide to Nick to conduit to us ahead of that will of course be gratefully received. So thank you very much. All right.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we'll definitely get onto that one. I know I've seen an email there and a whole list of other emails giving some information about that. So I'll look into that. But yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going on to our next item, which is the Regional Land Transport Committee. I'm not sure who's leading this conversation out. Robin? Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye, Richard. Bye, Charlie.
I'll let everyone disappear first. So good morning, councillors. So the point of today's briefing is just to work through the Regional Land Transport Plan to give councillors a bit of an overview, sort of a 101 session on what the Regional Land Transport Plan includes and currently covers, and then to move through into some discussion to help lead the review of that document that the Regional Council are just embarking on. And today we have with us Nigel King from the Regional Council. So Nigel's here just to observe or listen primarily, to get an understanding of the flavour coming through from Hamilton City, but also is available to answer any questions if necessary, as is Chris Allen. So I'll just jump into the presentation. Carmen, are you able to bring that up for me, please?
Yes, it may just take me a moment, but I can definitely do that for you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm on my iPad, so sharing screen doesn't work for me. So I'll just get started on this. So basically, the Regional Land Transport Plan is key from a transport perspective. It sets out our strategic direction over a 30-year period, but sets out also specifically the funding that we're seeking through the National Land Transport Fund that enables us to get funding through the New Zealand Transport Agency, or Waka Kotahi as they are now known. And it is a legal requirement under the Land Transport Management Act for these to be in place. And if I can jump to slide 3 now, please, Carmen. So the current Regional Land Transport Plan has 2 key components. It's the regional policy framework up the front, which is all of the necessary gumph that we need to work through this process. And probably the slightly more exciting part is the second half, which is where there is a list of significant activities and projects, and which is where we get our funding applications put through the National Land Transport Fund. So I say significant, it doesn't go down to the detail of every specific project in itself. There are significant policies that sit with the plan, and they have a dollar value as part of one of those things. Next. So as I started with my intro, the Regional Land Transport Plan is up for review now. So the version that we've got in place is the 2018 document, and that had a very major review undertaken on it, updating it from the 2015 version. The big change was really moving that to meet the new requirements at that stage of the business case approach. This review's looking only at a refresh, an update, just to capture the key things that have been changing. So councillors will be aware of the key documents such as the government policy statement, GPS on land transport, Arataki, which is the NZTA document, and various other things that are sort of happening at the moment, Road to Zero, all of those bits and pieces. So at this stage, their aim is to have a document released for public consultation at the end of this year, so that it can be worked through and lodged with Waka Kotahi by the end of April, such that we can then actually have our funding confirmed, ready for the next LTP period starting in July 2021. Next. So just quickly, the current RLTP has 3 strategic objectives, which are the ones shown on the left-hand side box. So strategic corridors and economic development, and that under the business case approach has been given a weighting of 40%. Road safety, which with 35%, and then access and mobility 25%. And then is underpinning objectives. So basically key to the success of any of those strategic ones was integration and forward planning, looking at affordability, which is also, again, a requirement that we need to look at, and then the environmental sustainability and resilience. Next. So basically, I've got 4 slides from here where I'm hoping to provide opportunities for elected members to start giving us some feedback. So at this stage, we've had some discussions with staff between Hamilton City and the Regional Council, and we're starting to form some early thoughts on things that we think need to be included in that next RLTP. So I guess from a council, and this is more focused from a Hamilton City perspective, I have sort of weeded out the more regional stuff. But it's really important to make sure that we've got the right hooks into this document, so that as we develop up various projects, programs of work, that we need to be able to show how there's a strong linkage back to this regional land transport plan in order to be able to get the funding. So just looking at the strategic corridors and economic development, key points that we're looking at the moment is making sure that we're maximising benefits from the expressway. So those benefits are obviously economic, but there's also some key safety benefits, etc., that we need to recognise as well. From Hamilton's perspective, recognising and adding in the Waikato Metro Spatial Plan is a new piece of work that's going to be key to our thinking for the next, 3, 10, 30 years sort of period. And the Southern Links. We've got the importance of the Taronga Hamilton link. So while there's been quite a strong emphasis in the current RLTP around Hamilton Auckland link, we're hearing, and this is what we're keen to get feedback on, that we need to also turn our eyes towards the Taronga link, and that's both, I guess, road and rail. And this comes not only with the economic stuff from a freight perspective, but later on also recognising that accessibility for the people movement as well. Rail, and then finally that Metro Spatial stuff. So just keen to stop here now and just to get some feedback from elected members. Are we going down the right track? Are there things that need to be added because we're missing them, or are there any alterations that need to be done? So keen to get some feedback on that, please.
Thank you. We have some questions. We have some hands up for questions. Councillors, I'm particularly keen to get a broad set of feedback. So no disrespect to you, Dave, who knows it inside out, back to front and every which way. I'm going to take your questions, but I also just urge those councillors who haven't had so much input into this direction to make sure that they share their view as well. That would be good. Dave, you're first.
I didn't hear your first comment, Paula, so that's good.
Oh no, it was a good comment. I said,
of course I heard it. No, look, I appreciate the point you've made, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I do think there's a structural problem in the Waikato Waikato Regional Transport Committee and Plan, which is no one's fault, it's national legislation. But we as a city have very different needs on most occasions, I'd say, certainly many from the rural councils, many of whom want more 4-lane roads and bigger intersections and things like that. And I probably would if I was in those as well. But there's, if you think about the RLTP we've got at the moment, things like public transport, all those things in the Metro Spatial Plan that Robin's talking about, the public transport, walking and cycling, land use patterns and that are definitely not top priorities and never have been. But they are the government's sort of main aims at the moment, and they're our main aims. And I'm just, the way the regional land transport plan, mixes different modes together doesn't work all that well for us. I would rather see separate priority lists. The sorts of things that are currently in there up the top, which are the Cambridge to Pairere Expressway, for instance, number 1. That's not number 1 for the city. So how do we ensure, I agree the Metro Spatial Plan's got to be, and that should almost, and the H2A corridor stuff, underpin the entire regional land transport plan, but it's not going to the way we do things at the moment. So I'm just wondering whether we have a 2-tiered thing, one where we have separate priority lists for the separate transport issues and almost let Waka Kotahi or the government sort out which ones they want to pick out of that, if you get what I mean. Because, Hamilton bus services competing within the RLTP discussions, it's a no-win situation. We've got 1 out of 11 votes, and occasionally it has come down to that. We try and reach consensus, and I understand where the rural councils are coming from, but it hasn't worked for us. Our priorities are not the same as others. So I'm just trying to put that extra context in. That's me.
Thank you. Sarah. Oh, hang on a minute, Sarah. Just pause a second. Robin, did you have, and I don't want to be too iterative, but in terms of the possibility of setting aside Hamilton's things or making our priorities clearer as Dave is suggesting, is because I know the regional land transport is a one voice, one plan for, and that's what worked for NZTA in the first instance. But given that we are heading in slightly different directions in some aspects, is there a way to accommodate Dave's thinking in that respect, or do you think that would be? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but he's raised a good thing, and we just need to think about it.
Yeah, so I think it's probably not necessarily me on the spot, more probably Nigel, I think, because at the end of the day, it is the regional council that are responsible for putting this document together. I do think that we've done quite well out of having a really close working relationship with the regional council to make sure we have got the right hooks. And, you know, when we look through the list of projects, there is a long list of Hamilton City projects in there. Probably between Hamilton City and NZTA, we dominate those long lists. But perhaps something that Nigel can talk to, or it may be just something that Nigel needs to take away and have a think about.
No, Nigel, hello, good to see you. Have you got a short response, or is that something that you will just gather as feedback and come back to us on?
Yeah, look, I'll have to take that one as feedback, and I'm very conscious that this situation exists through Councillor McPherson's involvement in RTC over prior years. This is not a new situation for us, and we do understand, I guess, that tension that exists in terms of having a very large, significant primary city that actually has quite a different set of transport issues to what a number of members of our wider region would have, and the way in which we will have to then reflect that in terms of our prioritised list of activities. Councillor McPherson clearly identified, you know, it's a one size fits all, and it doesn't necessarily reflect, I guess, the specific interests of each of our members on that regional transport committee. So some of the ways that we try to do that is we have taken account of, I guess, some of the significant growth priorities that Hamilton City has that are different to some of the rest of the region, and use that to influence some of our prioritised process. We also, through the document itself, have a sub-regional map that identifies those specific activities within the Hamilton City area and immediate environs that contribute to it, though it doesn't necessarily address the issue of having a two-tiered prioritisation system. So I am happy to take that on board, and it might be something that we can look at. Some of the response that we have to that is kind of tempered by, I guess, the development requirements that we have on a national level basis. But I think, you know, this is a regional plan, and this is our opportunity to reflect regional interests. So I'll certainly take that on board. Thank you.
Hey, Nigel, Chris here. Can I just jump in with two comments? From my perspective, there's, like Dave's right, like we've I've spent many years around that table and seen that play out, you know, where it is quite rural focused and all our priorities of state highways. But there's two things that drive that. One is the business case process of weighting. So at the moment, you know, we've got 40% weighting on corridors, 35% on road safety, and 25% on access and mobility. So I guess that's an area of debate. Have we got those weightings right as we move into the next sort of revision? And look, the other thing that's you've got to keep in mind too is that our regional land transport plan works in unison with the GPS. Like we could be have a great public transport project that's only number 15 in our priority list in the RLTP, but because it gets funded from a different category, it's actually number 1 in the funding bucket. So you got to read the two together in terms of what buckets of funding are in the GPS. That's why, councillors, we worked so hard to come to you with the GPS submissions and get the GPS right, so you can get the right funding in the right buckets. And I know, Sarah, looking at you, that you don't think that they've got that right and got enough money in the right buckets, but that's why it's really important to advocate at the GPS to get the funding in the right areas. Yeah, so just two observations. The weighting of where we put access and mobility and the revision, have we got that right at 25%? And really just thinking about the GPS and how they work in unison. I think also, Nigel, what we've got to see, I think, is a stronger move towards rail in our strategic corridors. So I'm just sitting here looking at our strategic corridors, and rail's definitely embedded in there, but they're way down in the priorities and strategic corridors. So with the emergence of the draft New Zealand rail plan and the GPS policy, maybe rail moves up a little bit in our strategic corridor priorities as well. Yeah, so just a couple of observations.
Thank you, Chris. Very, very useful observations too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful. Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm interested in just understanding a little bit better those weightings. So does that basically then determine, so that can be changed in this coming plan, that we can readjust those weightings essentially?
Yes. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, the question for unanswered for Nigel, but I would have thought that would be part of the debate. Nigel, have we got the weightings right?
Yeah, and that will be part of, we are hosting or holding a workshop with the Regional Transport Committee on the 29th of June. And that will be one of the questions that we have to pose to our members at the time, whether or not we have those weightings correct. The weightings themselves are set via a process for developing an investment logic map, which was part of the business case process Robin had mentioned earlier. And so that basically provides a weight to the specific problem statements that we develop in that, and it is used as part of the prioritisation response. We do have an ability to relook at that. I guess one of the things that we do have to take account of is there's also a piece of work nationally looking at how we reflect those priorities and how they do form part of our weighted prioritisation process, and we're looking at some national standardisation. But depending on, we may need to do some desktop exercises ahead of that to actually see whether or not we've got that right, because I am also aware, particularly because we have these underpinning priority areas too that are unweighted but considered to deliver on the program. If we were to follow a process that only took account of weighted percentages, anything that was considered an underpinning priority would actually come out with a rank of 0 or at the bottom of the list, and we know that that's not the case. So actually what we do have to do is account for this by other means. So yes, taking account of your point, we do have the ability to look at it, and we do have discretion as a regional entity to say, yep, that looks right, or it doesn't, and then adjust the weighting or adjust the final priority accordingly.
And right, just to be clear, Sarah, one of those underpinning priorities is climate change, which I know is dear to your heart as well. So they are pretty important underpinning sort of priorities as well.
And in terms of changing those weightings, we were kind of, I guess, going back to Dave's point, a little bit held hostage by what everyone else wants to do in the region. So is that kind of where Dave's point comes in around having a separate list of priorities or doing things a little bit differently to be able to ensure that Hamilton's priorities are clearly articulated?
Yes, I think we've got a couple of ways that we can do that. We do have a section 2 where we identify specific sub-regional activities or areas of significant priority for us. It's a two-part process. We can signal through our strategic. So there's two components to the regional land transport plan. There's the strategic front end, which effectively tells the story about what we need to invest in and why, and that's supported with our priorities, our policies, and our implementation measures. And then the second component of that is the program response that we've got to deliver on that. And so there's this tension between, I guess, readiness to proceed and priority, and we know that some of that is also driving what gets done at the end of the day. And so we can make sure that we put our best foot forward in terms of having our activities prioritized as highly as possible, but there's also a lot to be said for having an activity that is ready to go and making a good case for it, and that exists at any stage of investment. So we just have to be very clear about what is important to us and put that forward. If we go back to a very, very old version of what we had previously, we had a regional land transport strategy, and we had sub-regional components of that which actually articulated specific priorities and 4 different sub-regions of our overall Waikato region. So potentially we could even look at how we do that. It would be reflected predominantly in the strategic front end, and then we'd have to really put some very significant thinking into how we reflected that in a prioritised list also.
So, councillors, I'm just mindful of the time. We've only got 10 minutes scheduled to continue this conversation. Are councillors happy to either go later, or do we need to try and move on? Happy to take direction either way.
I think we should move on. We're happy to, I don't know how councillors feel about going till 12. That's the only time I've got. Dave, of course, can step in and chair if need be. That's not an issue. How do you all feel? How are you all placed for time? You got another half hour up your sleeve? If so, just put your thumb up. No. Okay. So no.
Can we just have the opportunity to speak with staff afterwards? And I mean, I personally need to do some catching up on reading or something to get in a better position to ask questions anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it would be good to have some more discussions, because I understand, and Councillor Dave might be able to confirm, that he and Angela are both not available on the 29th of June for that RTC. Is that correct, Councillor Dave?
I'm certainly not, and I've just got to check on Angela because she was unsure.
Yes, so I believe that she's unavailable too. So that's something else that we need to think about for that upcoming meeting and how we deal with that. But anyway, I'll move on in the meantime.
Yeah, that's not good. However,
Martin just volunteered.
Pardon?
Martin's volunteering.
No, I'm not. Look, I'll 100% endorse Dave's concerns. Offline, I want us to have a deep discussion of where we fit into the transport situation. You know my views that it's even utterly pathetic that I think Dave doesn't, as of right, get speaking rights because we only have one voice at a regional, the land transfer committee. So the whole structure, to me, from our point of view, doesn't for us constructively first before we go back to regional council, needs a deep analysis as what's going to work best for us. I think we'll be the only metro in this country that's in this kind of position. It's a very curious thing, but I do think I just 100% endorse the points Dave's made, and I think somewhere amongst ourselves we need to get our heads clear as to what type of structure we are seeking moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. That'd be an interesting question to ask. Is there any other metro how do they work their interests in?
We've got the most extreme difference, but there are others that have a big city and rural ones. We've just got more rural ones here, Nigel. I think 10 or 9 of them plus Hamilton or something.
Taronga would be pretty similar.
But they've only got 4 others.
That's right. They've got less. Peripheral ones,
So what I suggest you do is we finish, because you had about 4 more slides, Robin, didn't you? 4 or 5?
I've got another 3 slides to work through, yes. So these ones potentially will be a little quicker. So Carmen, if you could bring up the one on road safety, that would be appreciated.
And if any councillors have to drop out in the meanwhile, then they can look at the slides and give you a call, Robin, or email you their feedback.
I think it would be useful if we get email and perhaps reply to all, so that all elected members are sort of part of that discussion, and seeing what's coming through for Chris and I would be useful. Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. And then Dave's made a good idea that we could convene a discussion next week to pull it all together with a group of councillors and staff, which I think is a good idea, Dave. Okay, so anyway, ploughing onto the road safety. If you have to drop out, drop out. If you can stay on, stay on. If you want to feedback to Robin, do so by email. Reply all, not as we usually love those reply alls, but and Dave, Angela will look at convening a drop-in opportunity to coalesce this next week. That's the course of action today. Thanks. Road safety, Robin.
Thank you. So road safety is fairly reasonably well unchanged. It's still really robust, and there's some work going on at the moment for a refresh of the regional road safety strategy, and that's going to be presented at a workshop to the RTC on the 22nd of June. to then go out and have that more widely consulted upon. So that gives us an opportunity to feed into that. But I think Waikato region has been leading the way nationally with regard to the road safety strategy work that we have been doing. There will be some updates as part of that work to reflect the Road to Zero strategy that government had consulted on, and we'd fed back on that. And also just noting that the continued focus on speed management, where again, the region and Hamilton City are leading the way. So happy to pause quickly to see if there's any questions or any points before we jump into access and mobility.
Any questions, Sarah? You've got your hand up, or it's from up before? Thank you. No, that's fine, Robin.
Cool. Right. So access and mobility. So this was the third key strategic area. So there has been a bit of change certainly coming through with the GPS looking at the better travel options as being one of the strategic components there. And there's also a need to pick up what the H2A Metro Spatial Plan are going to do. As Councillor Dave has pointed out, this one's probably the one that's really particularly focused more for the metro rather than the rural type areas. But looking to increase the mode shift, looking to increase mode shift to the PT and those sort of active modes that we've got, and then looking at the rail components that we've got, not only embedding what we've created and is about to commence for that Auckland to Hamilton sort of corridor, but also looking at what are the opportunities for extending that out across to the bay. So that's the sort of the thinking at this stage. So happy to stop and take some feedback there on that one.
Okay, let me see. Dave. No, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, that's a really good slide. Encapsulates the general areas. I'm wondering whether we should specifically use the phrase 20-minute city as part of our response to certainly within the built-up area transport.
Mm-hmm. Yep, cool, thank you.
Any other feedback on that one? No?
Okay, last one.
There you go.
Gathering speed now. So these were the ones that are the underpinning objectives, and as Nigel pointed out earlier, with regard to those weightings that we've got, are ones that even though they're not weighted, we still need to somehow be able to reflect their importance. And I think the GPS with its requirements around climate change was the draft document had climate change, and part of our consultation feedback talked about that sort of environmental sustainability, but also making sure that we had resilient networks, because often it's the networks that suffer as a result of that climate change. So at this stage, there's not an intention to change those underpinning objectives, but to recognise that the importance that is coming through and some of the different pieces of work that are coming through, both GPS, but your H2A and Metro Spatial. So I'm happy to stop and take any questions and comments on that one.
Okay, I'm liking the look of this in many ways. Any other feedback? No. Sarah. I could see you. I could see you.
Yeah, I've got a bit of catching up to do, I guess. Seeing where we've got into to date, I'm always a little bit sceptical of everything. So I'd be keen to know if there, from staff, you know, your advice or thoughts around how we can really strengthen our ability to deliver on mode shift and deliver on, you know, walking and cycling, as well as PT as a city. We've, you know, haven't really done a stellar job so far in terms of biking in particular. So yeah, keen to know how this is going to be fundamentally different from the last plan to actually deliver on that.
So it probably relates slightly more to the previous slide, which was the access and mobility. And I think that there are pieces of work being done. So this is where getting all of our key documents, such as our biking micromobility and those sorts of things, landed. So getting through those hurdles is the problem. I think there's enough in the regional land transport plan to support that and to give us the necessary hooks. That's certainly not holding us back. It's other processes that are holding us back. And both Dave and Chris are both grinning like Cheshire cats. So it's either a personal joke or they.
I've just told Chris that he needs to make sure blind Freddie can come to the meetings.
Oh, all right. Okay, any other feedback on that? No. So I do agree then, because I think there are some key people not on this call as well. So if we circulate the slides, I'll need to have another close think about them too myself. I like the general direction of the slides. I think still interested in pursuing how we can elevate some of the key positions of council, but that's for all of us to decide, so that we can give Angela and Dave the correct direction. So just thinking about that, and we'll invite Nigel to give that some thought. Doesn't need to be a completely parallel stream of work, but some way of managing that to see if we can be, clever about the way we've done that without putting the backup of the wider region, because certainly we don't want to create an us and them either. That's my personal view, but we do want to see if we can, give more priority and elevation to the metro as the central hub of transport across the region, really, which is what we are. And the fact that this council is taking a more holistic approach, which I know Angela Strange and others at your end are also doing, Nigel, with the climate, the modal shift and the climate action and things like that. We're seeing probably a different direction than we've had previously in these plans. And of course, it's under a new government as well. So that makes it another interesting point. So councillors, thank you for your feedback, and look forward to seeing your roundup of information. And Dave, will you keep me in touch with what he sets up for early next week? And that's all within time, Robin? That's fine for you?
Yeah,
yes.
I've asked Chris's office to do that. He's agreed to set it up.
Yeah, so the RTC meeting's on the 29th. So I guess the other key thing we need to talk about is, and that can be at the next meeting, is a representative there. Now, Nigel, while we've got you on the line, is there an ability, given that Councillor Angela and then Dave, our nominated alternate, are both not available, for us to have somebody else attend and speak at that meeting?
Yes, yeah. Look, we're holding this one as a workshop, so it's definitely possible to have another attendee in place.
Brilliant.
Okay,
I take it, and not with. Can you hear me? I take it we're not restricted to just one person. If it's a workshop, then the city, given its population and all of that, could send 2 or 3 elected members if need be. Have I got that right?
Sorry, I'll just have to check with my democracy services team. I mean, we are subject to different meeting requirements, obviously being a workshop, but I can certainly inquire as to.
I'm in no way being discourteous to you and the regional council, but your answer totally highlights the point I was making before. In terms of the cities, I mean, basically being equal to Otahuonga with respect. We're a bit more than Otahuonga. No disrespect to my good friends in Otahuonga. Anyway, I'll be guided by Dave and Angela. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think that's right. First of all, the most important step is that this council as a unit is clear, because whoever goes to speak on their behalf, if it's not Dave and it's not Angela, and I'll have to look at what my availability would be. Martin, you'd be good too, because you've got history with that committee, as we both do. Sarah, of course, may want to participate. But I can understand why you couldn't have too many, but you might be able to extend to two, which would be really ideal for us, which is no different than what we have with Angela and Dave usually in attendance anyhow. So I think, yeah, the key message to me is councillors need to give me, Martin, whoever, who's going to speak on as a clearest steer possible, so that we're not acting unilaterally against the will of council. So, all right, I have to leave too.
The other thing, that this is just part of a process. So this is the workshops to provide regional council staff some direction, and this will then result in some consultation documents. At a staff level, we will continue to work really closely with the regional council staff as well to try and help with the wordsmithing and make sure that we've got the right hooks. And then finally, we've got a document that comes out to formal consultation, which gives council a formal ability to submit as well. So it's not like everything hangs on, you know, getting it perfect on the 29th. There are still other opportunities coming through to refine and polish that process.
Thank you very much. All right, councillors, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leave this meeting.
Nigel.
Yeah, thanks,
everyone.
Nigel. Haven't seen you in ages. Now I see you on a screen. So.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Right.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you all. See you later, Sarah. Forward to it.